welcome everyone then to this meeting of the virtual CICS user group. Still admitting people. So yeah, I'm Trevor Eddles. I'm CEO of iTechEd Limited. We're a mainframe consultancy, analysis and technical authoring organisation. We're the people responsible for the content on the virtual CICS website, and we produce the newsletter. And if you've not been on our website yet, you can find it at virtualcics.hostbridge.com. Let me just admit a few more people. So today's agenda then. As usual, most of the meeting will be taken up with a presentation, and today our guest presenter is Robert Barnes. He's CEO at Jazz Software, and he will be discussing CICS Web Services, Bridging Two Worlds. A copy of the slides from this presentation will be on our website later today, and if you missed our previous meetings, you can download copies of those presentations from our website too. And you can listen again to the whole presentation. So there's a link on the resources page. So it's virtualcics.hostbridge.com/resources.htm. Following Robert's presentation and any questions you have for him, we'll move on to the latest CICS news and the latest CICS related articles. And then I'll give you the dates and times for the next virtual meetings. So that's the plan for this meeting. I'm anticipating that it will last just under an hour. More people to admit. Let me do that first. Right, so today's presentation, as I said, is from Robert Barnes. Robert is an experienced developer, entrepreneur, and IT and business consultant. He authored the textbook PL1 for Programmers, which was published in 1979 by Elsevier, North Holland. He also developed Manasys in the 1980s, which was supported by Fujitsu and closely integrated with Fujitsu's own mainframe software. More recently, though, he founded Jazz Software. That was 2012. And he was reimagining Manasys for the current world of Windows, web, mobile apps, and everything else, all working with mainframes. So Robert, I'd like to thank you very much for being with us today. If anyone does have a question for Robert, can you just type it into the chat and I'll try and interrupt him when he pauses for breath, and he can answer your questions. So what I'm going to do now is ask Robert to share his screen.
Okay. Thank you, Trevor. Right.
I can see it.
You share it? Is it working?
Yeah, I can see it. Yes.
Great.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you, Trevor, for inviting me to talk to you. Let me quickly introduce myself. I started my IT career in 1970, working as a developer for Databank in Air New Zealand. Along the way, I developed mainframe and PL1 skills, and as Trevor's mentioned, wrote the textbook PL1 for Programmers. Critical for me at that time was that while I was in New Zealand, I encountered EasyTreeve. I immediately saw how much quicker it was than PL1 for basic report writing, but I also struck its limitations. If only there was a product that worked like EasyTreeve but generated PL1, we'd get the best of both worlds. I got quite excited when I realized there was no such product, but I knew how to develop one. So I started Mana Systems, which developed and sold the first version of Manasys, effectively EasyTree generating PL1 or COBOL. Real success came with a second version, closely integrated with Fujitsu's proprietary mainframe software, supporting relational databases, they were the hot news at the time, and 3070 type online systems, crucially solved by Fujitsu, not by me. Their customers weren't interested in PL1, so that option got dropped. The market for non-IBM mainframes dried up, and Sun and others were loudly predicting the death of the mainframe. So my company diversified into application software. This was less fun. So I sold it and became an IT consultant. As one of my friends says, what all unemployed IT professionals call themselves. But I was successful at that for several years. In 2013, out of the blue, I was approached by a former user wanting an IBM version of Manasys. I found that it was Sun and DEC, not the mainframe, that had died, and the IBM mainframe was still thriving, with strong ideas about what the next generation of Manasys should look like. I couldn't let this opportunity go. So here we are again. Which brings us to today's topic, bridging the mainframe and client worlds. The days when CICS networks and 3270 displays provided adequate solutions are long gone. So it was obvious that this had to be a major focus of Manasys version 3. But how do we get our mainframe data to and from the client world of mobile apps and web pages? We need to develop CICS Web services and client apps that work with them. But that's not easy. You need different development teams, but they talk different languages. Things get lost in translation. We'll start with the mainframe side, where you need CICS Web services. CICS Web services are like classical CICS programs. They start with an input message, they do something, and they send back an output message. But there are huge differences. The messages aren't 3270 screens. They're whatever we want, any length, any format. There is no COM area to pass data from step to step of a conversation. Everything must be in the message passed to and from the client. Without COM area, we can't save a reference copy. So how do we manage pseudo-locking? Service and client must communicate in a standard format. They don't speak COBOL, we don't speak Java. We need to exchange information in a standard format that all can understand. Today, the most common standard is JSON. And the clients aren't just displays. They have their own logic. They might do anything. Here's how they work. A JSON message is received at the top. It works its way through the pipeline and is passed to our program as a COBOL message, COBOL's record structure. Our program does its thing and sends the message back, and it goes back through the same process, emerging as a REST message, that's JSON. As application programmers, we will just focus on this bit, largely ignoring all this. We need to be vaguely aware that this pipeline process is happening and ensure there's a couple of JCL steps after the COBOL compile that generate the JSON and conversion modules. But otherwise, we can leave all this to the system programmers. Even so, there's a lot that we must get right. This is not a job for novices. For example, suppose we want a web service to update employee records from the DB2 sample database. A single record update is about as simple as it gets, but our program must lock the records, check that the employee hasn't changed since the preceding inquiry. It's got to provide Kick pseudo locking, but it doesn't have COM area where a reference copy can be saved. It's got to validate the new data. We've got to make sure that we don't put non-numeric values in EMP-NO, that we don't give a value of sex that isn't F or M, and so on and so on. This information isn't in the JSON schema, so it's got to be supplied by a COBOL logic. Plus, of course, all the usual stuff, checking that message and database IO statements work as expected, formatting data correctly, and so on and so on. Even for a simple program like this, a lot of code will be needed in low-level languages like COBOL and Java, over 2,000 in this case. But let me show you the easy way of generating this program. We start by preparing a definition of the employee table that Manasys Jazz can understand. With simple dialog import from SQL, the table information is read from the DB2 sample database and a basic definition created. But it's lacking a lot of information. Nothing here says that EMP-NO is numeric, that work department has to be an existing value of the primary key of department, sex can only be M or F, salary can be less than 0, and so on and so on. So we edit the basic definition to add these rules using properties like pick, exists, codes, and min. Now EMP-NO and phone-NO must be numeric. Work department must be an existing value of the primary key of department. Sex can only be M or F, and so on. And since the department manager was a character one field with Y meaning true, a traditional Boolean in COBOL, I changed its type to Boolean. Now we generate a web service from this description. First, we choose the dialog new web service. We fill in the details. My typing is always impeccable when I'm using a video. And we click finish. Because of the exists relationship, we're offered a chance to get data from the department table. So I've chosen to add the department name. There, done. First, we get to see the message definitions. Copy statements reference related tables like employee. There's a control definition and there's an input and output record. We can edit this if we want to, but we usually don't. Then we see the Jazz logic. I'll draw your attention to a couple of features. Firstly, except is used whenever you're getting data from an external source and it could be invalid. So you want validation logic. Except function will check that in this case, it has one of the values E for inquiry, U for update, A for add, and D for delete. And the service will return an error message and terminate if not. This accept is particularly powerful. It will accept every field in the input and validate it against its definition. This is where we check that work department isn't department, sex is M or F, and so on. CICS pseudo-locking is managed with save sum and check sum. This is an inquiry portion of the program. We calculate a checksum and we save it in the output record and send it back to the client. On the following update, we recalculate it and check that it hasn't changed. This gives us the same security as we had in classical CICS, where we kept a copy. But all the client will see, if they ever see this checksum, is a bunch of hex that means nothing to them. Click process, and in less than a second, about 2,500 lines of COBOL are generated. A job is submitted to ZOS to compile it and generate the JSON and WizBind. With Microfocus, enterprise developer dialogues are used to compile and bind the service, but the principles are the same. Your service is now ready to test with utility software like Postman or Ready API. This test with Ready API shows a request for employee number 60 and the data that it returns. You can see the checksum at the top there. Right, so we've now got a web service that appears to be working. You can go through and using things like Ready API, test it thoroughly. But the job is only half done. We really need a client because this isn't what people actually want. But developing a client app is also not simple, at least without Manasys. We need to develop this client. Before we do, are there any, Trevor, have you got any questions about the web service that are relevant to ask at this time?
We haven't got any questions at the moment.
Okay, I'll keep going then. Getting our client team to develop apps that work with our new service isn't any easier than writing COBOL. Not only must they understand the rules of the service, they'll be using different tools with different concepts. Never heard of anybody developing the clients in COBOL. It's as if the mainframe and client teams speak different languages. And like Italian and German, subtleties are lost in translation, and sometimes they're important. When we found that .NET Core would not be restricted to Windows, but would also be available to Linux, Android, iOS, and so on, we saw how we could fix this problem. What if Manasys generated a client-side interface, encapsulating the service rules from the same information used to generate the service itself? Facing the mainframe, it would speak mainframe, records, message formats, fields, function codes. It would know how to interpret the data returning from the service, like whether the inquiry returned the only record or one of many. It would know what validity rules apply to each field and know transaction rules, such as the checksum must be returned with an update. It could hide things like that the client doesn't need to know about, like the checksum. Facing the client, it would speak client, methods, and properties. All the mechanics of sending messages to and from the mainframe will be reduced to using a method like inquiry, with simple arguments. Settable properties like job will be instantly validated unless mainframe IO was required. For example, job can't be more than 8 characters. You are not able to set CICS to anything other than M or F. Hire date must be a valid date, and so on. It will also provide read-only properties like error messages, HTTP codes, and so on, allowing the client to know what's happening. Read-only values could also be provided for coded fields. For example, sex value says male when the value is M, female when F. Browse count tells us when an inquiry returns a single value or when there are many records. And so scrolling commands are needed. So how do we create these interfaces? We do a little bit of setup first. We create a CSharp project to hold all the interfaces for our web services, naming it with a service name used to generate programs. In my example, my JSV. We configure the JAS workbench so it knows where to find this project. Now we're ready to create the interface. My personal naming convention is to name them after the program, e.g. JSPG2 client is the interface for service program JSPG2. ZOS users need to check that the JSON input and output messages are in your local JAS project folder under the current version. They will have been created on the mainframe and need to be copied back. For Micro Focus users, they'll already be there as they are generated in the correct folder when you created the whizbind. With JAS in the correct folder, creating the client is a matter of 2 clicks. That generates about 1,000 lines of C#, mostly in the logic, 900 in the logic, but 100 in the request and response objects. There it is. Okay, so what have we achieved now? We've written the right-hand part of this, the CICS Web service. We've written the middle bit, the interface. The final task is to write this client on the left. This bit on there. This is your responsibility, as we don't know what you wanted to do or what language you'll be using. But because we've generated an interface that deals with the detail of interacting with the service, we've made it easier for you. You'll just include the interface and then set properties and execute methods. The interface won't let you set invalid property values. And the method calls are simple because you just set parameter values and let the interface look after the details. So you don't worry about the rules like returning the checksum. You don't even see it. Here's a Windows form I designed for JSPG2 test. I designed it to display all the data available from JSPG2 client, except I forgot to put the department name on there. Labels display the values of read-only properties. Text boxes are used for properties that we can set. Buttons will activate the inquiry, update, add, delete functions of the service. Clear and close are local methods. Here it is running. put in 10, it returns a result. By the way, notice that the data is reflected in your own culture settings. For example, dates are here displayed with New Zealand settings, even though they were transmitted as 8-digit numbers with century first. We can change anything we like within the rules and set update. But the update won't let us give invalid values. Sorry, the interface won't let us get invalid values. The objective is to do as much local checking as possible, because avoiding a round trip allows instant response. But some things, like checking whether work department exists as a department value, or that an update is invalid because someone else has changed the record, requires server-side checking. In fact, the web service that we generated will completely check the input. It doesn't rely on this interface to have done the checking for it. Doing an inquiry by the alternate key returns several records. Scrolling commands appear, and we can scroll through either with the next and previous buttons, or by giving a skip number and go to a particular record. I said that with the interface we've made things easier, but it will still take us about an hour or so to write that client program. We don't have the time this morning to write that program. And anyway, you didn't come here for a lesson in C# programming, even if I were expert enough to deliver one. If you want detail, this URL will show you in detail how to write client JSPG2 test. But let's just review what we have done. With a data definition and a few clicks, we created web servers JSPG2. 2 more clicks developed the interface, simplifying the development of the final client. And with our 3-tier architecture, we're provided built-in validation so that the logic to provide client-side property checking is already provided. Methods have been very much simplified, and you don't see details such as the actual messages or have to worry about rules like returning checksums. And finally, making change is much easier. Suppose there's a change in your data definitions. For example, I discovered that our government departments were now given the option of entering G for gender diverse as one's sex. Easy. Just change the data definition like this, regenerate your service in the interface, and the change is done in minutes. The client, the bit you wrote, probably won't need to be changed. Well, it doesn't in this case. Mainsys Jazz already offers much for bridging the worlds of mainframes and clients. You can develop CICS Web services for vSAM or DB2. Each service can return 1 or many records in each response. You'll remember from the demo that after getting the first employee of work department A00. It took a couple of seconds for the next response as we scrolled forward. I couldn't find any measurable difference between program JS PG2 returning one record at a time and JBS PG2A, which returned 10. But with 10 records at a time, scrolling is now instant, except for each 10th record. Very easy way of improving performance and usability. And secondly, with both VSAM and DB2 and any future types we support, you don't need to send the whole record to the client. Clicking select rather than all fields, you get a dialog that will offer you the choice of selecting which fields are to be sent to and from the client. Service patterns currently supported are single record type or parent-child, plus, of course, the related records, as you saw us get department name from the department record. With each of these, it can be inquiry only. You can add update, add, and delete functions. As always, Manasys is a multi-level tool. The generator provides initial logic, and this is often all you need. But the generated code is easily extended with the full flexibility of the Jazz language. You can even extend Jazz with COBOL statements, giving you the full flexibility of COBOL for the few functions that it doesn't provide natively. And with all of this, even if you had to insert COBOL, 2 clicks generate a client-side interface to work with your service and simplify client development. There's a lot already there, and we're not out of ideas yet, but it's time for our development priorities to be set by customers. A number of our ideas have been written up in the roadmap. But whether we do these or something else, such as implementing DL1 support, will be determined by them. Of the ideas that we've listed in the roadmap, these are probably the most interesting. Conversations. We can't use comma area to pass data from step to step, so everything must be in the message. We've designed a solution for conversations where information will be encrypted, written into the output message, returned, and decrypted from the next input message. Conceptually very easy with our structure of an interface to manage all this. More flexible data structures. We currently generate web services with a single record type or a parent-child record set. We'd like to be able to create web services that can send any sequence of records, as if they're writing various record types to a sequential file. Again, design work on this is reasonably advanced. We know how to do this. The question is whether it's worth doing. Prototype clients. We could generate clients in a number of languages and types, CSharp, VB.NET, Java, etc., for Windows, web, and mobile apps. We'll discuss with our customers which of these should be prioritized. I hope you'll leave here wanting to learn more about Manasys Jazz. The links below tell you where you can get more information. Our website gives you general information, and the featured video summarizes this talk in 3.5 minutes. A link lets you download our software. I hope some of you will do this. creating an account with your work email and try it out for free for a month. Other videos show some of the things that it can do. For batch processing, MounAssist supports easy retrieve conversion, data mapping, conversion, reporting, and more. It also still supports classical Kicksia development and SOAP web services that communicate with WSDL instead of JSON. The help and training page gives you more information, including a video training course on the Jazz language and links to the various series of help pages. A couple of links that are particularly relevant to today's talk. The first link shows you how to create web services, and we'll go through the creation of program JSPG2 and its sibling JSPG2A. The second link gives you detailed information about creating client interfaces. And that's it. Thank you for listening to me. I hope you found this interesting. Please feel free to contact me either by email or connecting with me on LinkedIn, and I'll do my best to respond promptly. Happy to take your questions. Love to hear your feedback. Thank you. So I suppose I should stop sharing now. Can't hear you, Trevor.
Sorry. Right, you can hear me now. Yes.
Yep.
Good. Right. I was just going to say a couple of questions came to me. If anyone else has got any questions, if they can put them into the chat, please. So, what I was going to ask you is, how is MounAssist Jazz licensed, and what would it cost someone if they did want to use it?
It's licensed to users, which means developers, so that it generates standard objects, COBOL, C#, etc. There's no runtime code, so that if you were developing with it, that would be one license. We'd license to you, but your clients who you're working for don't have to have a license to run the programs. The cost, currently for low numbers, it's $500 US per person, per developer per month. But give us a big order and we'll talk discounts.
Okay, that's interesting. You were talking about sort of things you were planning to do in the future, your roadmap. So what is the philosophy that drives MounAssist Jazz development?
The key philosophy is summed up by Chris Date's title for one of his books, Say What, Not How. Remember back to that definition of the employee record. We have put into that employee record everything we can about that record, and there's more stuff we could have put in it. So in one place, we're not saying anything about check that the sex is M or F. We're just saying sex is a one character field that can have a value M meaning male, F meaning female. It's just a bit of information. We'll use it if necessary. But having done that, all that information gets reused. So we don't, we get that your conventional development tools like COBOL and Java leave a hell of a lot of information behind that is then up to you as programmer to know and to build into your logic. That shouldn't be necessary.
Okay. Okay. So you're generating code, COBOL, C#. Just how efficient is that generated code?
I'd like to believe that it is as efficient as your best programmers would write. Assuming, of course, you haven't turned on the debugging options. But in production mode, the code should be as efficient as anybody can write it, unless they leave out vital validation. Now, it will generate some quite big programs because there's typically about 20 to 50 lines of COBOL for each field validated. But good luck to you if you think that that code is unnecessary.
Okay. So are there any risks with using man-assist JAS?
It should be very, very low risk. We would like to believe that actually the risk is higher with writing manual code. Now, the chances of me making a mistake in deciding what man-assist develops in terms of its COBOL or C# is as high as the chance that you would make the mistake yourself in writing that COBOL or C#. But having been through and debugged it and got the mistakes out, then it's following very standard patterns, and therefore the code should be more robust, less error prone than manually written COBOL. There's no runtime or hidden traps for you that could bind you into some kind of risk that, the new changes, the IBM bring out a new release and suddenly your code doesn't work. If they do that, none of your COBOL is going to work. Right.
Okay. So, I mean, if anyone were interested in trying it out, you say you do a month free trial. How long does it take to learn how to do it?
This is a guess because we don't have good data, but I would think that you would be able to download, configure it, and be doing very simple stuff like writing reports and so on in 2 days at most, 3 perhaps. Doing something, as I've just demonstrated, is a bit more complicated. You need to understand what's going on with Kicksia. I wouldn't expect a pure novice to be able to do what I've just demonstrated if they knew nothing about Kicksia and web services. But it could work very well in an environment where a novice was introduced to this with a grey hair around to consult when they got into trouble.
Okay, good. And I think I've only got one more question, and that's, tell me about your competitors. How does your product compare with theirs?
The interesting thing is, I'm not aware of any direct competitor. As far as I know, we're the only product that will handle both the mainframe side, generating the CICS Web service, and also client side. Of course, that's only one part of what it does. There are, in particular areas, I mean, you could say that EasyTreeve is a competitor for our reporting facilities, that Telon is a competitor for development of classical Kicksia, but they're all competitors of just a part of what we do. So, I mean, it may be my ignorance because I don't spend a lot of time looking around at competitors. I'm too busy pursuing my own dream.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, we haven't got any other questions come in the chat, so I'm going to say thank you very much for your presentation today. To tell everyone else that Robert's actually in New Zealand, so it's very, very early in the morning. He's got up to do this presentation for us. So thank you for that. And as I always say, because we're a virtual user group, please assume that we're giving you a virtual round of applause. So thank you for that.
Right. Yes, it's interesting that very different to standing in front of an audience and being able to interact. It's kind of odd. This is the first time I've actually done something of this scale.
Okay. Yeah, no, people are typing in thanks into the chat, so that's great. Okay, well, I'll move on. I'll share my screen again. Right, so in terms of news then, if your site uses CICS APIs, then Adaptogent has launched its intelligent caching engine, which is a distributed in-memory data cache designed to reduce mainframe integration load and costs, while reducing API response times by up to 50 times, they say, for mission-critical data and transaction calls. And the link to that story is on our website. So let's move on to articles and blogs then. There's why you should consider using the Elastic Stack to view your CICS TS data. That's by Nina Mirsky-Fitton, and that's in the CICS part of the IBM Z and Linux One community. That was published on the 27th of April. Then we've got Increased Business Agility with CICS Transaction Server by Mark Cocker. It's in the same place. That was published on the 5th of April. Then we got this one, CICS IA, easy access to CICS IA jobs via ZOS Explorer. And that's by Prithikashri M in the CICS part of the IBM Z and Linux One community. That was 1st of April. And then we've got a new way to raise requirements on Z software products by John Tilling. And that was from the 25th of March. So let's have a look what we got planned for the future. Well, our next meeting's on the 12th of July, and we've got Stuart Francis, who's lead software engineer at IBM, and he's going to be discussing developing and modernizing CICS applications with Ansible. And then the meeting after that's on the 13th of September, when we've got Russ Tubner, CEO and co-founder at Hostbridge, and he's going to be discussing the impact of macros on CICS workloads. Now, from June onwards, Rocket Software, one of our co-sponsors, has decided to focus its budget on other areas and withdraw support for the virtual CICS user group. Now, the virtual CICS user group has been in existence since 2010, and the user group gives its sponsors an opportunity to show that they're working with and helping to build the user community. It's a good method for those sponsors to enhance the way they're viewed by customers and prospective customers. And to be honest, it seems like a great opportunity for any organization to get close to the CICS community in a very positive way. So from June, co-sponsorship is available for the user group. And without sponsorship, we may not be able to continue. So what I'm saying is, if you work for a vendor and this is something your company would be interested in, then please let me know. My email address is on screen at the moment. Okay, moving on then, just a reminder that we're all over social media. You can keep up to date with what's happening in the world of CICS and on the Virtual CICS User Group website. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, and there's a group on LinkedIn. And the URLs are all on the homepage, so you don't need to try and copy them down from this. And yeah, on Facebook, like us. Everyone likes likes. And if you do tweet, then the hashtag is #virtualCICS. The last thing, I think I mentioned it last time, that we do have a YouTube channel, but we need to have 100 people to subscribe to it, and then we can generate a vanity URL, so a much more logical URL than the one that we've got at the moment, which obviously is computer generated. So if when we finish today, you can go and subscribe, that would be brilliant. It's the link to the actual recordings of the presentation. So if you follow that, you can subscribe. Okay, well, that's all for this meeting of the Virtual Kicksia User Group. Can I thank you all for attending? Thanks to HostBridge Technology and Rocket Software for sponsoring our user group. And of course, I particularly want to thank Robert Barnes for his presentation. So that's it. Thank you all very much for joining the meeting, and I look forward to seeing you on the 12th of July. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Trevor.